We're lucky enough to be doing this webinar here on site at the Chicago Brand Museum. For anyone in packaging to see all the displays of the packages that they've pulled together here, it's a candy store. We're going to explore this topic of packaging design as we walk around this venue. Lisa Pierce, Executive Editor with Packaging Digest. In 2024, Tropicana launched an ill-fated redesign and watched sales plummet 19% as a result. This was an eerily similar situation to the 2009 failure that garnered major headlines and transformed the industry's design attitudes and processes, establishing a design validation protocol that has lasted for 15 years. Many in the consumer packaged goods industry are now asking what lessons can be learned from that costly misfire and how brands can avoid becoming the next Tropicana. Today, we're going to tackle the central issues raised by this bombshell, including how much design impacts sales and how to manage the creative process to create positive business outcomes. Our panelists today are experts in a range of disciplines that are germane to this discussion, including design effectiveness, branding, and the creative world. Together, they'll reassess the power and practice of brand design with new takeaways and some practical guidance for driving brand growth. Let's meet each of them. I'll start with you, Steve. Steve, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Steve Lamoureux. I'm the founder of Design Analytics. I've been in the CPG space most of my career and happy to be here.
Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia Beardwood, founder of Beardwood & Co., a branding agency based in the New York City metro area.
Peter.
Hi, everybody. I'm Peter Clark. I'm the founder of Product Ventures. I'm an industrial designer by background, and I've been in the industry specializing in structural package design now for 35 years, and Product Ventures has been in existence for 30 years, servicing the world's best-known brands.
Fred, how about you?
Hi, I'm Fred Hart, branding and designer for the last 15 years in the CPG space, former co-owner and partner at Interact Brands. Exited that business in May, and now I'm an independent brand and design consultant in the CPG space, working mostly with challenger brands.
Faye, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Faye Moranti, founder of Experimenta, but I've spent most of my career in the CPG in-house design world. I work as a fractional design leader now, but I've worked at Hershey, Danone, Coca-Cola, and mostly in brands that touch consumers, doing a lot of design that feels real in the world.
John.
John Gleason, I'm the founder of A Better View. I spent 20 years at Procter & Gamble, and since leaving P&G, have been advising brands and agencies on how to run better businesses. So my focus is the business of design, not necessarily the wonderful creation.
Okay, so we're going to get into it. I just want to ask, here we are, Tropicana 2.0, take two. What advice would you give the industry about this latest redesign? Peter, let's start with you.
Economic pressures has kind of become the loudest voice in the room now. And I think design and the potential of design, being that it's kind of the potential of design, it's intangible, versus the economics are right there on paper, right in front of decision makers. You have to have a lot of experience and kind of, in a way, an intuition to know that design can really make a difference. And I think right now with supply chain shortages or inflation, in the case of Tropicana, who just went through 2 hurricanes this past year, I heard that 75% of their crops due to an infestation, that they had disease. So a lot of pressures economically on them that they needed to do something. And I think the lesson learned from this is, did they do the right package design in the end? Because what I'm seeing is the stripping away of meaningful brand experience, better ergonomics, more emotion in the prior craft package. That this is a very practical pack from a supply chain and efficiency and squared off standpoint, but it kind of erodes that brand meaning. And I think what's happened here is the voice of these economic pressures was the loudest voice in the room. So how do you have a more of a holistic viewpoint of all things, including the voice of the consumer, the potential of the brand, and really understand that the brand, this is your tangible ambassador. This is your always on beacon of the brand's value. And the name brand must always provide a meaningful point of difference and value add from store brands. This eroded it down to a me too, if you will.
Let's hear another perspective. Faye, what do you think?
For anyone that has been in-house or in the agency side, they get the brief, right? I think like 9 times out of 10, modernize, contemporize, make you bolder, more iconic, you name it. There's a million different things that come from our brand partners, from those trying to build a business, trying to build a brand, trying to build marketing around those brands. A lot of times we think those things are coming in concert and in perfect order, but most times they don't. And so when you see something like this happening at Tropicana, where it has happened before, so it's kind of like a design Groundhog Day,
yes,
if you will. 2009 happened. We all, as an industry, learned from it. Now, what we think we can learn from this is that there's some feelings and emotions and attributes that are very attached to brands that need to be taken into account when making those decisions, and they need to be part of the brief on top of the business objective, on top of the efficiency objective, on top of all of that. And designers, as the hub of empathy in the room, not that others don't have empathy, but we generally are the ones putting ourselves in the shoes of consumers and shoppers. We generally have a loud voice that gets muffled with all of the objectives that get into starting a project like this. So I believe that empathy and creating room and space for the discussions around, should we make this very practical move from a carafe that has equities and meaning to a bottle shape that could have, a new bottle shape could have meaning, it could have emotion behind it, but are we doing this at the right time? Or what is the sentiment around the brand that is taking it and still sustaining it, even in economic downturns?
Fred, how about you? What's your take?
I think to what Peter said, there's a lot of headwinds the business is facing. I've spent the majority of my career working with challenger brands that are stealing share from the larger incumbents. I've also been on the other side of the table working with Nestle, Hot Pockets, larger global brands to help future-proof them and fend them from category pressures from a lot of these challenger brands. The thing that I think I've learned being on both ends of the spectrum at this point is that in the creative process, you need to start testing to learning rather than just to win. The biggest issue, I think, is waiting for validation to come at the end of the process or to bring data into that. I think as creatives, we oftentimes have a negative stereotype or sentiments around consumer feedback early in the creative, that it kills creative, that it handcuffs us. But I think the reality is qualitative information is rocket fuel for the creative process. I don't know, I can't speak to what Tropicana's creative process was, but I know that there are certain principles that I've picked up along my career, namely people don't read, they recognize, that are critical to changing hallmark brands like Tropicana. And I think when you look at the label, it seems like all of the brand equity and recognition is still there, but the structural design clearly has a large impact and holds a lot of recall and equity. And walking away from that in hindsight seems to have been a part of the narrative of the failure here. And so how can you test earlier in the process is something I'm always working with clients on. That's led to, I think, great results. I've been fortunate to win 5 design effectiveness awards in the last 5 years, and it's usually because we bring in consumer perspectives early into the process so that we aren't just blinded by a lot of the business initiatives that are very valid, but don't create a complete picture.
Julia, what about you? What do you think?
Well, I think this one was a shocker. And it was a shocker because you could not believe that this poster child for irresponsible brand design was doing it again. You know, it literally has become a fear within the industry. I don't want to be the next Tropicana. Well, Kel surprise, Tropicana was the next Tropicana. Here we are again. When I saw this design on the shelf, my immediate reaction was, oh, they had a cost control initiative. And it does appear that that's true. They did have a cost control initiative, and there are good reasons, as Peter just pointed out, to have something like that happen. But if you're going to have a cost control initiative, you need to figure out how to sell this to your consumer base. And so you've always got to be thinking about the consumer first And that's my advice always to clients, is often when you go into a redesign, there is also, again, with the lack of resources, both time and money, that we're all under pressure to deliver within, there's often an intent to kind of skip over and what does this mean to the consumer? What does the consumer feel about the current package? What does the consumer feel about the current design? What's going on with competitors? So that you can really bring some insight at the start. In this particular instance, there are some great things going on with this new design. It's way more sustainable. It's using way less packaging. All of those kinds of things that would be very motivating, we believe, to consumers. It's the same great brand at a more sustainable place. And if only we'd told that story, we might have been able to turn this into a success. As it is, it comes across as a little bit of a bait and switch, and that it's a smaller quantity. How could we make that a positive to consumer if it had come with a lower price at a time of inflationary pressure? Maybe that could be part of the sale, but we really have to think about how to be informed by what the consumer thinks and to spin the story into what's positive to them, because there are definitely some very positive things about this move that consumers weren't told about.
John, what do you think? You've got quite a bit of experience at Procter & Gamble, and from my knowledge of them, they're experts at consumer insights. Maybe a little bit more on that?
I want to build on some of the things that have already been said.
Please.
So the first thing I'll talk about is we talked about, do challenger brands have a different process? For those of you who know me, there's not a conversation I don't use the term rewards drive behavior. And I think challenger brands, it's more about they have a different tolerance for risk. They have a different tolerance for the things that need to be done to resonate with their markets. Big companies are about risk aversion. They don't want to take big chances. And so most of the consumer insights come closer to launch as a way of validating, am I going to get fired for this? As opposed to the inspiration from the origin of the idea.
As Fred said, test to learn rather than test to kind of like prove what you've already come up with.
In my experience, peeking inside 150 big corporations and a couple thousand agencies, is the insight, inspiration at the front end often comes with the statement from the brand teams, we don't have time and we don't have the budget to go do that. I already know what I need to know about the consumer, which is why we see a lot of mediocre executions that may still do okay in market, but they don't necessarily resonate and create that emotional stickiness with consumers. But most big companies use the cover my backside research near the end, where parity or better is oddly the marker for, why would I ever invest a lot of money in something to come out with, it's parity, so we should launch. And the thing that I'll share, we're picking on Tropicana, but this is any brand. It's about choices. And I believe there were a number of headwinds that have nothing to do with packaging. The hurricanes and the storms and the production and capability and lower sugar consumption for consumers that have created this business headwind that caused Tropicana to choose not to listen to the consumer, but instead prioritize the efficiency number of, whatever the number is, 10 million a month, 20 million a month in savings if I launch this new pathway. And I think my own uneducated opinion on brand framing, Julia touched on, there are a lot of positive things that could have been said, still can be said, about the choices that Tropicana have made. And I think part of this is still a developing story. They still have the opportunity to correct some of that. But I think one of the things that we talk about empathy, design and designers are great at talking about empathy, but they often forget about the empathy for their own senior leaders and their colleagues. We are the arbiter and the advocate of the consumer, but we completely forget about the business pressures that our bosses and our bosses' bosses and our CEOs are under.
Steve, I'm very interested to hear your take on this. What other advice that you can give
Yeah, well, thank you for having us. I think this is a really important moment for us to reflect on what assumptions have we made in all this time. For me, both the case studies, and I have no doubt the 2024 case study will last the next 15 years the way the 2009 one did, is a story about unintended consequences. And we're hearing a lot about that, right? That wasn't their intent to lose sales. They had a lot of good intentions. It didn't work out that way. So for me, what I hope the industry learns from this is understanding what unintended consequences might we be triggering by doing this. My career started as a brand manager, so I had one lens to look through. How am I going to grow my brand, short-term and long-term? And so, from my perspective, I wish the lesson we had learned from 2009 was more about an understanding of how does design grow sales, right? What is that connection? It intuitively is a very powerful lever in your marketing mix, and yet most people don't even think of it in the marketing mix, right? We think of advertising and promotion and all these other things. But it is the product itself. It's at least 50% of the product, and in many cases, depending on the category, it may be 90% of the product. And so the question is, okay, what is that relationship between what consumers see with their eyes and their decision to buy this brand and not these other 5 brands that I also looked at on my trip to the store? And so my hope is that we nail down, open up our eyes, because if we don't, if we continue to go as we are, and half of what we do increases sales and half of what we do decreases sales, guess what? The leaders of these companies and ourselves will start to believe that package design is an inconsequential element in the marketing mix, right? If you take any large number of redesigns and look at the sales after the fact, the average is going to be pretty close to 0. Right? And it's because there's things going on, which makes design seem unpredictable and not very effective as a major driver of sales. That affects decisions on whether companies invest in design or pause before proceeding through the design, or using better practices so that creative process ends in growth. I think it comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of what is this relationship between design and sales. So this is our opportunity to consider those unintended consequences and ask ourselves, how could we do this better?
So Steve, as we've been talking with the group, we know that Tropicana had to have done some consumer testing on this. Where did it go wrong? How did it go wrong? Why did it go wrong?
Well, I can imagine a couple ways that it can go wrong. And if you think back to how we used to test products like this, you would do a market test. You would put these on a shelf in a market. You would read the sales results. And so since the internet came along, we found fancier, quicker, more private ways to do this testing. And I think that we lost track of what drives that sales and whether or not we can measure impact on sales with design. For example, this new product, given that it is square, we can imagine a bunch of these side by side on a shelf create a really nice color block, right? And that will do well in consumer testing when you're considering standout, even someone noticing a product. Can they find the right product? Well, these are all very well labeled for their variant. But what went wrong? 19% sales losses. By my calculation, there's about $200 million in lost consumer sales in a year's time across their portfolio from this design. So how did we miss that? And I think that's because the things that we have become accustomed to measuring, standout, findability, or even using methods like a virtual shopping from a shelf on a computer, aren't really measuring lifts in conversion, what I call conversion. A lot of the methodology is about standing out on the shelf. Consideration. Can we get into more consideration sets? Well, it turns out that a 5% increase in consideration may not help your sales, especially if there was an unintended consequence of people are less likely to convert. What does that mean? Well, the average consumer is going to look at 6 products in 4 seconds' time. That gives you about a 17% chance of being purchased if all things were equal. So the goal, it turns out, is to get a higher percentage of people to buy your product and not the other 5. When that happens, you can have double-digit sales growth, but you could also have double-digit sales declines. So if what might have tested very well for findability and standout, when it comes to the real market and people making decisions and they're choosing to buy the other carafe from Simply Orange or Coca-Cola, that seems to be what happened. This particular 2024 redesign lost 2.2 dollar share points for the business. 2 points of that went directly to Coca-Cola. What are we basing our action standards on? Are those really predictive of sales outcomes? I think is the biggest learning that we can take away from that. A shift from focusing on consideration to conversion. What is likely going to drive those double-digit increases because people are more likely to buy it, even if it means no more people see it. You don't want to have 1 step forward and 3 steps back, which I think is what happened here, and it's exactly what happened here.
So Fred, one of the things that you have said is that you see a lot of positives in this new design. Can you point them out to us?
Yeah. I think it's important that I start off by saying I'm not a category buyer. So there's some things that are not even relevant because I don't even purchase the brand. But I think what I do bring is a little bit of the challenger lens and kind of a newer audience perspective. In a lot of ways, there's a lot of sleek things that are happening about the new bottle. Feels more modern. I know that I don't, fortunately, struggle with any ergonomic issues. There's a lot of modernization that has happened. Now, outright modernization can be something that an entire industry goes through and thus is no longer a differentiator. But I enjoy the structure. I think other things, though, are the primary is that the equity of the orange and the straw were maintained. You know, I'm a firm believer that people don't read, they recognize. So the most recognizable elements of the brand are intact. Clearly, it wasn't enough to make the positive impact and difference that they were hoping for.
What about the functionality of the new design?
Well, they're using less plastic.
Okay.
And so that's a great place to start. The cap closure, they've diminished the amount of plastic that goes into that. It looks to me like it's post-consumer recycled based on the slightly darker tinting. So all of those are wins. They're not talking about it. And I don't know if that's because they're afraid of greenwashing or being called out by industry advocates. But it seems to me as if there are some sort of wins there. Also from just a pure footprint perspective, there's higher shoulders. You're able to fit more bottles in shipping containers and in routes, so it's probably more efficient from a carbon footprint.
And those savings add up very quickly.
They do, but there must be a reason why they're not talking about some of those gains, but I do think they're there.
Okay. What do you think about the package design development process in general? Do you think it's broken?
I think that the industry, particularly the larger companies, test to win, not test to learn. And test to learn is something that I'm really passionate about and use with a lot of our challenger brands, which is to say, test sooner in the creative process and test for qual, not quant. What you're trying to do is gain insights into why someone might prefer or dislike some new element versus current. And I've been fortunate to work with Design Analytics for the last 5 years. My old agency, we were a beta agency, testing their platform and tools. I probably tested 130 pieces of stimulus so far. So I like to think that I know the ins and outs of it. And ultimately what I learned is that you want testably different designs early on. You want to be able to learn by having more variables in play in the beginning and reading between the lines of what consumers are actually telling you, why they have a preference one way or another. They're not going to give you the answers, but the more that you can read between the lines and focus on the patterns, the more that you can then re-engage the creative process with real-world learnings. The biggest mistake we can make is getting into our subjective realms as creatives and thinking that we have the vision. For a company at this scale, you're designing for a lot of people, so you want to make sure that you understand the voices involved.
Julia, could you tell us, please, a little bit more on the sustainability side of things, both specifically with the Tropicana redesign, but just in general, how sustainability has been impacting the innovation in packaging design? over, let's say, the last 5, maybe even 10 years?
Yeah. So I think this is a great topic because it's very much on the minds of marketers and designers for all different brands. Sustainability has to be on the agenda. The struggle is that there is a gap between caring and doing when it comes to sustainability. A lot of consumers say that they care deeply about sustainability. That goes up particularly for younger generations. On the other hand, that there is a big gap between them saying what they care about and actually delivering with what they buy and really demonstrating what they care about. So the optimum for brand leaders is to find designs that can deliver both against the desired category attributes, in this case, taste, freshness, appearance on my breakfast table. That's sort of the decor aspect of how it makes me feel to have a beautiful bottle on my table.
Yep.
And yet being sustainable in a way that makes sustainability desirable. Some brands that have been doing a really great job of that, the one that it's kind of a poster child has been Gillette in the shaving category, where they've moved from blister packs into cardboard, cotton packaging. Mm-hmm. That has allowed them to actually improve the visualization of their product. It looks awesome on the packaging. In fact, now the whole shaving category has shifted over from blister packs into cartons, and it looks so much better in terms of delivering appeal to consumers and consumers even being able to see what each product is about compared to when they were in blister packs. And I think that that is a great example of the best of both worlds when achieving a sustainable shift is actually improving the consumer experience and allowing them to see the innovation. I think here there was definitely, you can just see the amount of plastic from the cap alone.
Yep.
There was a big sustainability move. I don't know exactly how much the plastic savings is from this bottle to another bottle, but it wasn't conveyed to the consumer that that had actually happened. And therefore it ends up looking more like a cost saving rather than a sustainability shift. And so a few people may be able to take that away. So I think you just need to be able to help the consumer get a more desirable experience at the same time they're having that more sustainable move and appreciate what you've done for them. Because consumers are looking for that easy win where it really doesn't take a behavior shift from them. It's just something that you've done for them that's made it easier for them to be sustainable while delivering a great brand message.
So, Peter, I want to talk a little bit more about the functional aspects, specifically of the Tropicana redesign, the recent one, but also if you can think of this in general with just packaging design decisions as we go along. So, a couple of things that you have already mentioned. One of them is the brand experience. When I think brand experience, I really think functional design and functionality of the package. Is that what you meant?
Yes, honestly, experience is that multi-sensorial. It's both the sight, but it's also the sounds, it's the touch, feel, all of that working together. So ergonomics comes into play. Packaging often is a tool for consumers, so that helps facilitate that consumption. Mm-hmm. So getting that right is super, super important, especially as you consider folks that are maybe up-aging. Orange juice potentially is a little bit more boomer rooted, where orange juice was always at the breakfast table. Mm-hmm. So you might have folks that have limited dexterity or arthritis or other issues. So you got to get that functionality just so. And some of the stuff, even at 46, which is a reduction from the 52 ounces, is a lot of weight when it's almost full. And how do you control that weight? And do you have arthritis? Is this the right width to grip? The thing with the craft was that the grip is at the neck, and the neck is further reinforced with these flutes, mm-hmm. which gives you a bit of a grip texture. So this enabled a bit more control than this does. Unless you have large hands, per se, then possibly you could grip at the center of the weight and be able to control it. But arguably, this is a more prescribed grip, a better grip than this provides.
What other functional advantages or disadvantages do you see in the redesign?
What Tropicana said in their kind of, not pushback, but explaining things that this is better to pour, better to store. So let's take the store for a second.
Sure.
Obviously, it's smaller in stature, it's more squared off, and the footprint is smaller. So arguably, it is a storage improvement as it tucks into the corners of your fridge. It's relatively the same height, but the footprint is smaller, so it's more compact. But that comes with the size reduction and potential more strict trips to the store, of course, to replenish this smaller size.
Unless they were finding that consumers were not drinking as often, and maybe the smaller size was better. Maybe that was...
Yes, that's the one area I kind of wish I was in the boardroom for. I would love to be a part of those discussions, and I'm hoping that they conducted research that revealed that the consumption patterns there's not the need for this much quantity of orange juice on hand. Or if you look across all households, including smaller households, that a smaller size is more right-sized. So there could be a strategic play there to right-size the quantity of product, get the ring-up cost down a little bit, but also just to better fit their daily consumption patterns. So that might be in play here.
Faye, tell us a little bit more about your approach, which I understand is the try it and see it approach to branding and the creative process and how that can lead to effective design.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. When we talk about building brands, when we talk about any kind of creative process, it's an illusion that anyone, as senior as they might be, has the answer. We don't. It doesn't matter how many years as a creative director you are, you do not know what's going to come out of it as much as any senior brand leader. And the earlier we embrace the fact that we all don't know collectively, faster we can get into try and see. And try and see, I'm a designer, creative director. I grown up in the age of design thinking. I like to add a component of being able to integrate the team working on it in that learning process, so that we also learn how to work together and how to actually take down the barriers of how do we talk about those really hard things to talk about in a group setting when we all don't know the answer, but we're afraid of saying it because there's someone super senior in the room. And so try and seeing is my version of design thinking applied to creative in general, in the sense that we're trying new things together. We're holding hands together. We know what we are all afraid of because we've had the conversations about what we are that we're afraid of. We are listening to the ultimate people interacting with the thing that we're creating. We're seeing each other and understanding if you're a business leader, brand person, if I'm a design leader, creative person, we have more in common than we have splitting us when we're working on that thing. So let's find that common ground so that we can feel safe to experiment, so that we can feel safe creating new things, and so we can have also a safe environment to have the hard conversations about maybe someone knows something but they're afraid of saying it, so hopefully they will not be afraid of saying it in this context. So try and seeing is the ability to actually do design thinking as it was intended to do, but with actually incorporating us as part of the users in the whole experience.
And this thought process of safe to experiment, is that something that needs to come down from the top, or is it something that brand designers can explore on their own?
Both. I didn't have a name for it. I guess I tried it way before I was in charge of anything, and I feel that it's kind of like a really cold lake where everyone is afraid of jumping. You just need someone to go first to make sure that it's safe for everyone else to go. And it's going to be cold and it's going to feel shattering. But at the same time, once one goes, then everyone else feels that they can go. And so it can come from a brand design manager. It can come from a CMO, a CEO. But it's kind of the idea of being able to talk frankly and openly, without company jargon, without a lot of acronyms, and talk about what is at risk for me at this? What do I feel unsafe or uncomfortable or whatever it might be with what we're doing here on top of what might be the challenges of what we're doing, because we have challenges of the brand isn't growing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, for me as the leader of this, I am afraid or I don't feel safe or I don't feel completely comfortable with X and Y and Z. So it can come from anywhere, and I feel anyone in any position can lead by example. You don't need a title for that, but it's tricky because the titles can be intimidating.
John, you've talked a lot about the business of branding and packaging design. It's clear that you think that there's a bit of a disconnect today between design and financial performance. But I understand you have thoughts on that as well as a fix.
Well, Lisa, I have lots of thoughts on these matters.
Okay, let's hear them.
I think one of the challenges that I see is the economic circumstances that we live in today, particularly starting about the pandemic forward, are driving short-term business planning horizons for businesses. They're more focused on this quarter, next quarter, which doesn't fully tap into the superpower of design, the ability to see the future and bring that back.
John, do you see that with privately held companies as well as with corporations, or is it primarily the corporations?
The quarterly cadence is not as prevalent in privately held companies, but I do think that there is this notion of short-term, in part because the privately held or the startup or the challenger brand feels the need to have to react to what's happening from their perhaps bigger competitors. So it drives this, how do I catch up? How do I do me too? Concurrent with that, design does a terrible job articulating what they do in the context of business. So if we talk about repositioning or reframing a brand, design and designers are often not saying, oh, this is going to lead to an 8% lift in sales. Most design organizations don't have a context.
They don't put numbers on.
Well, and part of it is I've talked to many designers to say, I went to design school because I didn't want to have to do the accounting thing or the numbers thing. But the reality is that they've been engaged in this accidental experiment to business. Just as business doesn't understand, they often see design as the packaging decoration organization. Yes. Mm-hmm. And the ability for design to influence some bigger strategy is difficult for the business people to see, how would you know about how to reframe our business model? And I think part of the challenge becomes how do we reconcile this inability to speak to each other? The ability for each side to empathize with the other. Designers are fantastic at empathizing with consumers and using that as inspiration for how to then create an experience. But the corporate environment is often terrible at the empathy for each other. The supply chain person is getting in the way of my ability to go do something, or the finance person is always talking about numbers. But I, as a marketer or a designer or a supply chain person, I often don't take the time to say, well, tell me about what's on your mind. What pressures are you under that I can't understand or can't see?
We've talked about a lot of things, but there's one final question that's burning in my mind, possibly yours. How can Tropicana come back from this? So, Steve.
Not exactly sure, but something should happen. We see actually this happen all the time. 40% of redesigns result in sales losses. What's amazing about the 2009 experience was in 90 days, PepsiCo slammed on the brakes, turned the car around, and avoided prolonged losses. So I think there's a lesson actually to learn from 2009. Much more difficult this time around. There's the structural redesign. It's not a simple matter of changing the mechanicals. So I'm not exactly sure what, but they should not just put good money after bad, realize that they've got a problem, they need to address it. These experts can tell you what maybe that solution looks like.
Tropicana is a fantastic brand. It is one of the world's great brands, and it is not going away. I think something that I like to say is there's nothing I love as much as a broken brand, because brands can be fixed. And I think in this instance, it's a case of diving in, figuring out how to connect this redesign with what consumers want, how to evolve this design based on what consumers want, and to tell the story in a way that really meets consumer needs and ends up winning in the marketplace. Because I do believe that this is a brand that can be saved, deserves to be saved, and with the right moves, it can win back the hearts and pocketbooks of consumers.
What Steve said is so true. With structure, it's a lot more difficult to pivot than with graphics. It's a whole other dimension, if you will, right? The good news is they are capitalized still around PET bottle filling and capping. So the infrastructure is the same infrastructure, it just needs new cavities for new form factors. When I looked at this, it just seemed like it, again, heavily leaned into cost savings and distribution efficiencies and that straight-walled aspects and stuff. But to go back to the range of other design options with this idea of driving cost out with the closure, which I think was a smart move, while still maintaining that evocative emotional appeal and that kind of breakfast table craft type of vibe. I think there's always ways with good design to capture the right balanced solution that's both going to save them a lot of money and be more sustainable, but also maintain or even drive that consumer desire and appeal. It's just about good design. So go back to the range of designs and or engage those that are really good at it to really listen to all parties, the consumer, the business. The design thinking as a construct is a really good construct. It really does work. You got to make it desirable, viable, feasible, and now sustainable. If you're out of balance on any one of those things, it just doesn't work. Here, they went after viability and sustainability kind of too heavy, and they dropped off undesirably. Go back to the drawing board, come back with a balanced equation, and they'll have future success.
It's a complex problem. I think they have to look to their audience for the insights to the answers. People can't tell them what to do, but I think by listening first and foremost, it gives them a better path to success. They lost the battle, not the war, but I think that at the end of the day, Tropicana doesn't have a design issue, it has a brand problem. I think the world is moving away from orange juice. It was contrived as a breakfast staple once upon a time. People have moved on from it. The world wants different things. Trying to pivot a business is a much bigger and scary endeavor, but I think there's a reason why they are partially private equity owned today, and that Pepsi has divested from the business. Whether that's new product innovation, moving into new parts of the store, but I don't think orange juice can be the future for them. To what Julia said, it's a brand that deserves to live. There's so much equity here and so much history. You hate to see things like that go to the wayside, but it's bigger than just a structural or a packaging. It's really, what does this company stand for in the future? What they did has got them to where they are today, but I think they need a clean slate.
When we go from a structure that is so specific to a more, let's call it generic structure, you can't just adapt what you had in the past. You're no longer, this is a revolutionary change with an evolutionary design language with it. And I think maybe they're preparing to divest. Maybe they're preparing to reposition. Maybe they're preparing to have an entire line of beverages that don't necessarily center on juice. We don't know, because we don't know what these shoes really feel like in their shoes. We know what we've seen in our past, but make lemonade out of the lemon, I feel, is the best way forward. If this is the structure of their future, then tell a story around the structure. Tell a story of what this means and what this actual vessel means in terms of, is there room for innovation? Is there room for growing different ways? Is there room for making this more affordable at a place where we're seeing things that North America hasn't been really used to? Inflation, prices that are going up, and a lot of uncertainty around food and supply stability. So there are a million different things that can be done, but I agree, it's not just a design problem. It is a full-on brand problem, but also opportunity for them to use this in their favor and build a story around this that then actually splits them away from the other orange juice per se category leaders.
I think for me, as I said before, this is not just a Tropicana challenge. This is a business challenge. We happen to be focusing on this particular challenge.
Exactly.
And I want to build on something Fred said. The pathway to the current execution was guided by a number of influential voices. They had some big consulting help behind the scenes, telling the story of efficiency to primarily drive a cost outcome. And being owned by private equity or majority owned by private equity, most private equity is about the money. It's not about purpose. It's not about loyalty. It's not about consumer. And so it's very easy for a big consulting company to be incredibly influential, to say you could save 10 or $20 million a month if you move in this direction, and that helps with the headwinds. It makes it easier to ignore the consumer as well. And I think part of it is the path forward is be more selective about the voices you listen to. I do think that there's a way to tell a consumer compelling story about the new choice, the new pathway. Kind of shocked that they're not already doing that. But I don't think, and to Julia's point, this is my favorite orange juice from a taste and a flavor perspective. And so it absolutely has a right to exist. But I think the key is in what context and for whom. And I think part of the challenge was, designers, we often ask, what problem are we trying to solve and for whom? And for what outcome? And to me, it feels like we were trying to solve a financial problem for ourselves and our owners for better profitability or better viability, as opposed to creating better experiences, which for the last 2 decades has kind of been the mantra of design. Let's create a better experience, let's resonate more soundly with consumers, and let's build a long tail of loyalty that allows us to exist in the consumer's world for a long time. And to Peter's point, I think there's a great story about efficiency and sustainability and creating a cost component that allows us to be competitive for you, the consumer. And I think part of the challenge is there wasn't a follow-up to that. It was just, hey world, here's this thing, much like 2009. Isn't it obvious why you should be buying us? And the consumer voted with their wallet and didn't buy.
Okay. So one of my favorite phrases is your strategy is showing. And in this instance, the strategy is let's cut costs.
Yeah.
And the strategy is showing. So you've got to change that so that there is some consumer incentive to make this desirable from their standpoint. And if that's saving me money as a consumer, sure, I'll take cost control if that's going in my favor. But right now it looks like we're saving ourselves money.
I think the other opportunity here is being somewhat privately held gives them the opportunity to be a challenger brand and to behave like a challenger brand, were it not for the fact that private equity tends to be about primarily, if not solely, about the financial outcome. And I think there's an opportunity that they're not publicly traded, even though they're still minority owned by PepsiCo, gives them that opportunity to go play around, go do things. Now, some of them are going to be costly if you're going to undo some of these things. And the efficiency metric is I've already spent, whatever the number is, millions of dollars on molds. I'm not going to not use them.
I think so. What you were just saying, and the thing that I think about with juice is like it is the ultimate commodity. It's practically water. It's a single ingredient, or a few sometimes. So all you have left is brand, but the brand has not been behaving in a way to create relevance back to the category as a whole. And there's opportunity to start misbehaving as a brand, which to use some of that challenger playbook that I think would help reinforce relevancy and bring new audiences to the table if we're constantly shedding audiences to private label and all of the other elements when the category is so simple to recreate from a product level.
I love that what can they do? Start misbehaving.
Yeah, truly.
Yeah, and if anything, the Tropicana brand has enough street cred, reputation to redefine parts of the category. I mean, there's like a whole shelf of cartons with the old generation of juices, and now we're looking at crafts, and you can see the evolution. You can see when cartons with juices became carafes with juices, and then you start having all of the juice mixers and smoothies, and like we can keep going on and on and on about where beverages have been going. But this is a brand that, unlike any startup or any newcomer brand, it has enough steering power still to be able to do some things that smaller brands would just wish for.
Yeah.
They would just kill for a fraction of the steering power that a brand like this is. And when you take something like this and you use it as a vessel for transformation of the category, then maybe you can actually catch the competition a little bit off guard. But that requires, I mean, it's not easy to pull and to rethink structure. We don't know what's in the shoes of all the business owners that have gone here. John, we have a lot of friends that we can do and imagine. But this is a brand that, unlike smaller brands that are elbowing themselves at Expo West for a fraction of the attention, they can just imagine what the category looks like and prototype it.
Mm-hmm.
So many great insights. I can't thank our panelists enough here individually. Peter, thank you. John, Steve, Faye, Fred, Julia, excellent job. And we will see how things go, both with Tropicana as well with what's going on with packaging design in general.